Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this week's Zoom session from the Canadian Association for the Club of Rome. Our host today is going to be Peter Meinke. And so over to you, Peter.
Okay, thank you. I guess our speaker today is Raymond Leury, retired information technology consultant and elected president of the Electric Vehicle Council of Ottawa. And Mr. Leury's presentation will be followed by a conversation, questions, and observation from the participants. And I'd ask you to use the chat to let me know, ask a question and give me some idea of the question. Thank you, and on to Raymond.
So hello, everybody. I'll just share my presentation here. Thank you very much for inviting me. And my name, as Peter said, is Raymond Leury, and I'm the president of the Electric Vehicle Council of Ottawa. Excuse me. And today we're going to talk about the expected policies that we could see out of the Canadian government, the US government for electric vehicles. And we'll look at the impact on EV adoption rates. You'll see as we go through that there's a bit of a lull, or lull is probably the wrong word, but we're in a situation where we're waiting for lots of regulations and lots of pronouncements by both governments. But at this point, things are in flux. But we'll talk about that. We'll see where we are. We'll see what the impact is on the adoption rates of electric vehicles. So first, just a bit about the Electric Vehicle Council of Ottawa. So EVCO has been around for about 40 years, and we have our origins in a group of people who were looking at doing conversions of gas vehicles to electric vehicles, and but we've since essentially refocused on promoting electric vehicles and accelerating the electrification of the transportation system. We are 100% nonprofit, volunteer organization, and if you're interested in joining our meetings, we meet every Monday, last Monday of the month at 7:30 Eastern Standard Time. And EVCO.ca, our site, has got information on that. And it's not posted for next month, but will be, for this month, I mean, but will be soon. So if we look at the agenda for today, we're going to look at the US landscape and why the US landscape. Well, it has a really big impact on what happens in Canada, as you will see. And then we'll look at the Canadian landscape, see where we're at, and see where the regulations and incentives are at. Then we'll talk about governments, other governments, whether they're provincial, state, or other countries around the world, and the impact of their regulations on what we could expect to see here. Once we've done that, we'll look at what the automakers are planning, and you'll probably be surprised by how aggressive some of the automakers are in their electrification plans. But once we've done that, we'll talk about forecasts and where we believe that the adoption of EVs is going, and we'll look at what some analysts are saying about it also. Okay. So first, a quote from Bill Gates. What Bill Gates said at one point is, we always overestimate the change that will occur in the next 2 years and underestimate the change that will occur in the next 10. Okay, so this is very applicable to the EV market, because the EV market is in a situation where it's starting to grow quite rapidly. However, because we're still in a relatively small market share position, it's very hard to forecast what the future looks like, right? But we do know what 10 years will look like. 10 years on the road, we have a pretty good idea what that's going to look like. We just don't know exactly when the big ramp up in adoption will occur, okay? But we'll get to that as we go through the presentation. So the U.S., if you look at the U.S. Landscape and tax credits in particular, so the U.S. federal government has had a tax credit of up to $7,500 that's been in place since 2010, and it's a tax credit, right? So it's not a rebate, and there are many states and local governments that provide some other incentives. California, for example, has got a $2,000 incentive. And that's been the landscape now for a while. Now, there are some plans to change that, and that will have a significant impact on the market in the U.S. So the Clean Energy for America bill, which has passed the U.S. Senate, includes a tax credit again. So it's still a tax credit, but up to $12,500 for all new electric vehicles. Interesting things to note in that one, it removes the cap of 200,000 deliveries in the US per manufacturer. So that cap right now is in effect with the current tax credit, and that means that GM and Tesla no longer get any tax credits. So removing that cap will supercharge the no pun intended, the sales from Tesla and from GM in the US. Also, another interesting part is there's going to be a 3 years, or there's a proposed 3-year phase out period that will be triggered when the market share is at 50%. So if you look at that and you do a bit of math and you assume $10,000 of tax credit per vehicle at 50% market share, that's about $85 billion a year in tax credits. That's serious cash. So that is going to make a difference in moving EVs for sure. Okay, so and if we look at a different part of the U.S. Landscape, so the regulatory side of it, the EPA in particular, you're probably aware there's been a lot of discussions and a lot of lawsuits and other things in the last few years between automakers and the U.S. government with the previous administration, where the previous administration wanted to water down the rules. And they actually did that in April of 2020. Now, what we expect is a new administration. They've actually committed to getting to 100% zero-emission light-duty vehicles by 2035. So we're expecting the new administration to come up with some regulation that will line up with that. But at the present time, they haven't got to that point yet. We expect within the next 6 to 12 months, we should see more specific stuff there. Some more specific numbers, because it's nice to say that by 2035, it's going to be 100%, but what happens in the meanwhile, right? So you can't talk about the US and electric vehicles and the like without talking about California. So California's got the Air Resources Board, which is very influential, and they have what's referred to as a zero emission vehicle mandate. And they've had that in place for a while now. And you could see at the top here, you see, actually, I should go on the other screen. You see the numbers creep up to 2025, but they don't have any numbers past 2025 at this point. Okay, so we're seeing a linear increase here, which you'll see later on. Linear doesn't quite conform to what we should be expecting to see. A couple of other things to say about that. Their ZEV mandate is that the one that Quebec has is based on the California mandate. It's verbatim, almost identical to the California mandate. Okay. More about the CARB. So many states, I don't know the exact number, it's somewhere between 12 and 14 that have aligned with with California and these regulations. So, and it represents about half of the population of the US, which means that half the US market, which is substantial, is being affected by these regulations. So regardless of what the federal government in the US does, these CARB regulations are in place and affecting the market. California has announced, and this is a fairly recent announcement, I can't remember exactly when it was, I think it was last fall, that all new passenger vehicles and trucks will be zero emission by 2035. Okay, so keep that date in mind as we go through. So they have said that they want all new vehicles, light duty vehicles, to be zero emission by 2035. They also want medium and heavy duty vehicles, to all new ones, to be zero emission by 2045. Okay, so but they haven't provided specifics about, what are the interim numbers between now and 2035 and 2045. That is yet to come. So there's a bit of wishy-washiness about what are those numbers going to look like exactly. Okay, but we'll get to that a bit further. So if we look on the Canadian side, we have federal incentives. So the IZEV program provides up to $5,000 rebate at purchase. That's an actual rebate; it's not a tax credit, and it's after taxes. The provinces provide various rebates. Ontario used to have a $14,000 rebate, which really drove sales a few years back. But the Ford government has canceled that. So there's currently no rebate in Ontario. And it's just about the only province in Canada that does not have a rebate at this point. Even the Yukon and Northwest Territory have some rebates. So Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba currently with Ontario do not have rebates. Everybody else does. So on the regulation side, I already mentioned that BC has a ZEV mandate. Quebec has a ZEV mandate. BC also has one that's loosely modeled on the Quebec and California version. Won't get into the details there, but essentially what Quebec has also committed to is 100% zero emissions, new vehicles zero emissions by 2035, and BC is committed to the same thing for 2040. If you look at the federal level, the emissions are currently aligned with the old EPA rules, that the ones that were in place and that the California still follows. So the ones that were in place before the previous U.S. administration watered them down. That being said, if you look at the targets we had for zero emission vehicles in the recent past, actually, Canada had targets. So these were aspirational goals. They were not mandated targets, but the targets were 10% of market share in 2025. And you'll see in the next slide how that compares to what we're seeing today in Canada. So 10% 2025, 30% in 2030, and 100% in 2040. Okay, so these were aspirational goals. They've just announced, the federal government has just announced in late June that now they've changed that to a mandated target of 100% all cars and light duty vehicles will be zero emissions by 2035. Okay, so we're aligned with what the Biden administration has said. But we're also in a similar situation in that we don't have the specifics. Okay, so I guess there's an issue of California and the U.S. Determining the specifics of that target, and also for us to align to that, right? Because given the size of our market compared to the North American market, it's highly preferable for us to align with the U.S. Rather than have something that's significantly different. So I wish we had more specificity, but that's where we are at this point. We have fairly aggressive goals, but the specifics are a bit light at this point. Okay, so what does that mean for Canada right now and where we are in terms of EVs in Canada? So the data you see here comes from StatsCan. I've got a link there at the bottom to the website where this is pulled from. And essentially what you see at the middle top here, you see that in red, those are the battery electric vehicle sales. And in purplish, that's the plug-in hybrid electric vehicles, okay? And you can see that over time, we're seeing as a very substantial increase in volume. 2020 was a bit of an exception because of COVID. The overall volume of sales in Canada dropped by about 20%, but the number of electric vehicles going up and the share of electric vehicles still went up. Okay, so even though we had a large drop in sales in the overall market, we still had more electric vehicles sold in 2020 than we had in previous years. So we're seeing here the start of what looks like an exponential increase in sales. Okay. A couple of other things to note here. So that means, if you look at all the vehicles in Canada, all light duty vehicles is 3.5%, right? But if we look at the split here in the middle bottom, you see that light blue represents passenger vehicles, and we've had passenger vehicles in market for a while now, and we're seeing substantial numbers of passenger vehicles being sold. Same with SUVs. So SUVs started appearing somewhere around 2015, and we're seeing a substantial increase in the sale of electrified SUVs. If you look at the other two categories here, though, the vans, which there's only one PHEV in market still today, and there are no pickup trucks at this point in market in Canada. Okay, so that is why the numbers are so low. And what we expect to see is, as we've seen with passenger cars and with SUVs, we see a big uptick in market share as soon as vehicles are available in those categories. And they are coming quite soon, especially in the pickup category. So to drill down a bit more specifically in the numbers, to give you an idea of how adoption is and what demand looks like in Canada, these are passenger vehicles only in 2019 and 2020. And you can see that BC is already at about 25% market share for passenger cars that are electrified. Okay, so 1 in 4 passenger cars sold in BC in 2020 was electrified, so battery electric or plug-in hybrid. Okay, Quebec a bit behind that with 17%, and Ontario the laggard. Still a large increase from the year before, 3% to 4.6%, so that's like a 50% increase. However, the overall numbers are still small. Okay, and that's due mostly to the fact that there aren't any provincial incentives offered in Ontario. Okay. So meanwhile, what are we seeing elsewhere? And Europe's very important here for one main reason. When you look at the introduction of a new technology, what matters is the adoption and learning curves for the planet. We'll get to learning curves in a couple of slides, but bottom line is, Europe right now, because of carbon regulations, the market share for EVs has been growing very, very fast. And so this is a comparison from 2019 to 2020. And you could see the last countries here, Germany, France, Luxembourg, and United Kingdom. They're similar to Canada in 2019, but in 2020 they just explode. The market share triples in all of those countries. Okay, and we're seeing large growth in other countries in Europe too. So the good news there is that's driving sales of EVs, and that's driving down the cost of batteries, which we'll get to in a moment. Okay. So what's the holdup? Why are EV sales still low in North America in particular? Okay, so like I just said, battery costs are a big deal. So this is a projection here in 2010 from Tony Seba on the price of batteries over time. So we know from studies of learning curves and that kind of thing that the cost of technologies drop over time as production increases, as we learn more about the technologies, as we improve the technologies. So he predicted a drop of 80% over 10 years, and the actual real drop was 90%. So bottom line there is the cost of lithium-ion batteries has dropped dramatically over the last 10 years, over 90%, and it's slated to continue dropping for some time yet. That's very important because the main cost of an electric vehicle is the battery. And as the cost of the battery goes down, well, then the cost of the vehicle will go down. And we're seeing that already with many vehicles. And I could cite you many examples, but I won't dwell on that at this point. All to say that what we're expecting is we're expecting the powertrain cost of mainstream here, electric battery vehicles. So these are Honda Civic type of vehicles. They're not Tesla Model S's at $100,000 a piece. They're mainstream vehicles. We're expecting price parity somewhere around 2023. Okay, so when we get price parity, there won't be a sticker shock when you go buy a car with an electric car that's $10,000 more. So because of the payment, you can't afford it. So you you buy a gas car instead, right? So we're going to see the cost of the purchase be the same or less in a few years. This is already true in some categories, particularly the higher price vehicles. This is already true. If you look at the cost, the total cost of ownership, the total cost of ownership in most cases is lower with an electric vehicle. However, most people don't consider the total cost of ownership when they buy a car. They consider the upfront cost, and that causes a barrier to adoption. Okay. So if we look at a bit of theory here, so you've probably seen technology adoption curves in the past, and this is more or less what they look like. And they, as the yellow line shows here, over time, when a technology actually succeeds in being adopted, there are some technologies that never get adopted. Laser discs come to mind. I'm sure you can think of some other technologies that have gone by the wayside. But what happens is when a technology is successful and everything is pointing in that direction for EVs, the adoption curve follows the shape of an S. Okay, so it starts off slow, then it accelerates rapidly, then it tapers off as we get to large market shares. Now, if you look at that and apply that to a bunch of different technologies that were introduced in the US, these are US numbers, over the last 100 or so years, you could see that every single one of these is a S curve of some sort. Okay, so you see a few curves that are a bit wonky. So you see some here that are wonky. That has to do with the fact that there was a Great Depression and a Second World War that affected adoption rates here. And you see other wonkiness like this one here. This is airline adoption rate, air travel adoption rate. And it dropped in the 70s because of the energy crisis that I'm sure most of you remember when we had the OPEC issues back in the 70s, right? So that's what caused that. But every other curve is some form of an S, not always pretty, not always very linear or very, very smooth, but it's an S. And if you look at closer to the present, we're seeing the curves generally get steeper because market adoption is getting faster as we're able to adopt new technologies at a faster speed. So let's look at a specific example here and try to transpose it to what we're looking at for electric vehicles. So this is the adoption of color TVs in the US. And it's very typical, very nice curve here. And you could see that for a period of about 10 years, so starting around here, so around 65 to about sometime in the 70s, 75, 77, the rate of adoption just went through the roof. Okay, and then it tapered off as most people had an electric, had a color TV at home. Okay, so the adoption rate, once it got up the first parts of the curve, it started and prices started going down because of higher production rates and all that, improvements in technology. So prices went down, adoption went up faster, prices went down further, adoption went up even faster. So this is a typical adoption curve, okay? From an electric vehicle perspective on a global level, we are somewhere around here. There are some markets that are higher than that. So Norway is much higher. There are some markets that are a bit lower, like Canada, but we're somewhere around there. So we know that it's looking like we're going to have a large explosion in market share of EVs over the next few years. The question is, when is this going to happen? And this has been a major issue for the manufacturers. So when should they take the leap? So you see here, this is a picture on top of my son and my daughter at the Grand Canyon. They're actually crouching on a ledge on the other side, but you don't know that because you can't see the other side, right? So it's the same thing with business people who are looking at a business that they've been running for 100 years. So they've been selling combustion engines for 100 years. And all of a sudden, there's a large technological change coming up, and they don't know what it looks like on the other side, right? So there's a lot of reluctance to move. Businesses are risk averse. If you move too fast, you're going to lose lots of money. And we've seen that with some market participants. But if you move too slowly, everybody else is going to get market share before you. So if you're sitting in a boardroom, or we're sitting in a boardroom maybe 5 years ago at GM or a place like that, you're seeing this coming down the pipe, and you're thinking, well, I've got to figure out when is the optimal time to move, and that's a serious problem to have. So if you look at some of the market movers we've seen and what they seem to have learned, and actually I spoke to some people from Nissan here in Canada, and this is what they told me. So if you look at what's not in parenthesis, this is a lesson they learned. So they learned that with the Leaf, which was introduced in 2011, I believe, they learned that selling EVs is hard when there's no demand and no charging infrastructure. So it's true that there was no charging infrastructure, but actually what they should have learned is that selling overpriced EVs, because a Nissan Leaf was quite pricey, certainly at the beginning, compared to the competition in that market segment. So selling overpriced EVs is hard when the car is as ugly as can be, and I hope I'm not offending anybody who owns a Leaf here, but the original Leaf, some people like the look, but most people didn't like the look because it didn't look like a conventional car. So it drew some people away because of the appearance. Nissan at that time was thinking that people wanted to virtue signal by having electric cars. So they wanted a distinctly different vehicle that people would recognize right away. But in my case, in my personal case, that actually got me to not buy the vehicle, okay? And so the other part here is, so when the car is as ugly as can be and there is no supply, okay, so there was a supply problem, not a demand problem. I've talked to many people who've been looking for electric vehicles over the years, and I've heard over and over again, and I've heard the same thing from other people who are working in this space, that supply has been an issue. You go to a dealer and you tell them you want to buy an electric car, they try to convince you to buy a gas car. Okay, why? Because they don't have any on the lot and they want to sell you what they have. So, and GM with the Volt and the Bolt, they learned a similar lesson, a bit different in their case. And but what I'm saying they learned is that selling EVs is hard when there's no demand and no charging infrastructure. So demand, that was false. The supply was the issue there too. So if you wanted to buy a Volt or a Bolt, you had to really look for it and get past a salesperson who wanted you to buy a gas vehicle, and they were overpriced. And we're seeing GM react to that with their new versions of the Bolt that were just introduced recently are about $5,000 cheaper than the previous year's model. So they're adjusting that, and they're reacting to that. So so basically, people who were early, or manufacturers that were early to the market, learned the wrong lessons about the market. And Nissan, they just announced their second electric vehicle in North America about 6 months ago, I believe, which will be introduced, I think, in the fall. So they had a lead, very substantial lead in electric vehicles, and they learned the wrong lesson, and then so that led them to dismiss EVs and focus on other things instead. And Tesla's showing the way. So if you look at Tesla and what they've done in every single market they've gone in, all of a sudden there's huge demand for EVs, right? Why is there huge demand? Because there's supply, and there's especially with the Model 3 and the Model Y, there's supply at reasonable prices. Okay. So what about the manufacturers? What are they saying now? So we've seen over the last year a significant amount of announcements from various manufacturers about spending tons and tons of money. So most manufacturers are spending tens of billions of dollars to electrify their fleets. So that the tens of billions of dollars are required for R&D to develop new models and to develop plants that will produce mostly the batteries, right? So, and if you look at the specific commitments of various automakers, the first three there are the big three in North America. So GM, all their light duty vehicles, including their pickup trucks by 2035 will be electric. Okay, so Canada just announced We want to ban the sale of of gas and diesel cars by 2035. And GM is saying, well, we're not going to be selling any anyways. Okay, Ford haven't seen the number for North America, but in Europe, they're saying that by 2030, they'll be all electric. Okay, Stellantis, which is the former FCA, Fiat Chrysler Automotive, I believe it was called. So they have said that they will do 70% Europe by 2030 and only 40% US by 2030. I see this as being problematic because it will be way behind what the other manufacturers are doing, and the big three are not necessarily the most aggressive in this space either. Although the other two are much more aggressive than Stellantis. If you look at Honda, they said that zero emissions by 2040, sooner in North America. Didn't say exactly when. Jaguar, very interesting car, high performance, high luxury cars. They will discontinue. So current internal combustion engine products will be discontinued in 2025. So in 4 years from now, Jaguar will sell only EVs. Okay. Land Rover 2036, Mini 2030. And if you look at the list here, this is another list. I don't want to go too much in detail here, but Volvo at the top in 2030, Lincoln 2030, and Mercedes-Benz in the middle of 2030 to 31. So we're seeing the high-end vehicles moving rapidly to electrified vehicles because that market segment is already at par between electric vehicles and gas vehicles. Okay, so manufacturers are moving very fast, have announced billions of dollars of investments to support this, and are starting to roll out products. We're seeing many products coming to market over the last year, and many planned for the next few years. So if we look at what governments are doing, so and this is a sample of some of the governments and what they're doing. So Germany, so here there's a mix of countries that will ban the sale of gas or diesel vehicles at a certain time, and there's others that will actually ban existing gas and diesel cars. So you see that the Netherlands and Norway, Netherlands in 2030, they're going to ban all gas and diesel cars. Norway in 2025. So Norway, a country that's got a climate that in many ways is similar to ours, is a petrostate similar to what Alberta is. They're going to ban all gas and diesel cars in 2025. Okay. Sweden, same thing. UK is actually the least progressive of the Europeans, and they're more progressive than we are. They're more aggressive than we are in terms of policies. Okay. European Commission is looking at some regulations they'll be bringing out this year that will make the sale of internal combustion engines even more difficult because of the tightening of carbon emission standards. Okay, so that's what the governments around the world are doing. And why is it important? Well, it's important because that is driving numbers. It's driving the need for batteries. So it's driving volume and driving prices down. Okay. So if we look at our forecast, which we term as conservative, this is EVCO's forecast, and I'm just putting it in there to illustrate our thinking. And you compare it to an S curve, right? So our curve shows that by 2025, we'd be at about 50% market share for electric vehicles in Canada. Okay, for light duty vehicles. So this is fairly optimistic, but this is based on what we've been talking about already through this presentation. If you look at what Bloomberg New Energy Finance is doing, so Bloomberg New Energy Finance is a very interesting organization because they have analysts studying these things in detail. And if you look here, what I'm showing on the screen is their predictions in 2019. So they were showing in 2019 these numbers here. So by 2040, there'd be only about 50% market share would be electrified. One of the things to notice with this particular prediction here is that it's really a flat curve. There's a bit of a exponential rise here, but the rest is flat, and that just doesn't jive with what we're seeing with the adoption of technology and other technologies, right? And given what we've seen with the government incentives and government regulations and all that, it's likely to go faster anyways. Now, Bloomberg NEF just came out a few months ago in April, I believe, with some revised predictions. And actually, the revised predictions are a bit more realistic from our perspective. You see what looks like the start of an S-curve here. By the way, fuel cell here won't happen. We could discuss that in a question period, but this won't happen. And it's interesting that they're saying that plug-in hybrids will fall in popularity. We believe that is absolutely true, probably faster than here, actually. And hybrids, we don't see, what we expect to see is a much larger increase in electric vehicle sales, pure electric vehicle sales. Now, this scenario that they have here is one of two scenarios they have in their report. This scenario is what they call the economic transition scenario. So this assumes that the market behaves behaves based on market forces, not on regulation and all these things. So this is what the market should do without government mandates and that kind of thing. So, but if you look at another, the other scenario that they show us, so here I know this slide is a bit busy there, sorry about that, but the economic transition scenario, ETS, is the first one they have, and that's the one for cars here. That's the one in the darker, or not, the one that's not dotted there, the full line here, okay? And they have the other scenario, which is a net zero scenario, which assumes that governments are going to implement policies to match what they've said about, having zero, getting to 100% zero emission vehicles by 2035 or whatever they may have committed to. And that is the pointed line you see here for cars in particular here. So in here, you're seeing 100% market share by 2035. So this is Bloomberg NEF telling us that if governments do what they said they're going to do, we're going to get to 100% market share by 2035. That matches what we think. Okay, definitely matches what we think. But there's a few other things to note on this this slide that that's interesting. So if you look at the first category they have here, 2- and 3-wheel motors or vehicles, they have an S-curve starting at 40%. That doesn't make sense unless this is a new S-curve for India, where so the 40% here is mostly due to adoption of electric 2-wheel and 3-wheelers in China, and India is still falling behind. So if this is an S-curve caused by India's S-curve in adopting 2- or 3-wheel electric vehicles, then maybe there'll be an S-curve like this, but it really doesn't make sense to have an S-curve starting at 40%. But they're seeing a strong adoption of electrified vehicles there. If you look at buses, you may have heard that the City of Ottawa has announced that they will have a completely 100% electric fleet by 2036. So that aligns with the dotted line here, right? And this looks like an S-curve. It really does. And currently today, we are at about 40% worldwide market share for buses are electric, okay? So that seems to be sensible from a certainly our point of view. If you look at the last one here, this is medium and heavy duty commercial vehicles. They're seeing a relatively slow, an S-curve here, 2 S-curves there, right? But a relatively slow adoption without any government incentives. We believe actually the adoption in the medium and heavy duty sector will probably be faster than for personal vehicles. The reason for that is that the people who make decisions on buying commercial vehicles, and this will apply to the light duty commercial vehicles here in sort of grayish color, the people who make the decisions there have accountants, and accountants will are realizing, and we're getting we're getting queries from people asking us, what do they have in terms of electric option for vans and all that, because they want to go to EVs to save money, right? So the operational costs are so low that there's a lot of fleets that want to go electric right now. And we believe that as soon as electrified options will be available, and this is happening as we speak, we'll see a rapid conversion of the commercial fleets to electrified fleets. And again, we expect to see this to be faster than personal vehicles. The reason for that is basically commercial vehicles, they use accountants, they do the math, they know they're going to save money. Personal vehicles, it's a bit different. People are concerned about where am I going to charge, range anxiety, that kind of thing that affects the buying behavior. So we expect that it'll take a bit longer for consumers to adopt that. So, 10, 15 years seems like a very fast adoption curve for any technology. But this is taken from a presentation from Tony Seba. And if you're, I would encourage you to look up Tony Seba. It's very interesting. You have to take some of the things he says with a grain of salt, though. But what he shows here is that in 1900, well over 100 years ago, on Fifth Avenue in New York City, there was one car and there were tons of horses, pedestrians, obviously, and tons of horses, right? Well, 13 years later, there was one horse and tons of cars. So this happened at a time when our industrial capacity was much, much smaller than it is today. Technology moved at a much slower pace. We didn't have the big companies that allowed us to do massive production facilities to turn out all these vehicles, right? And it still happened back then. So the point is, there's no reason to believe this won't happen again, right? Now, in conclusion, what's really driving this change, as much as I would like it to be climate change and people's desire to do something about climate change and reducing greenhouse gases, what's driving this is economics, it's money. So it's market forces, and EVs are actually better vehicles, and we could have a discussion after that as to why we believe that, but they are better vehicles than gas or diesel in just about every respect. They're soon going to be less expensive than gas or diesel vehicles, so that won't be a barrier anymore. And the operational costs are a fraction of the gas equivalent. So the total cost of ownership is already today, in most cases, lower with an EV, and it will just become more so as we progress over the next 5 or 10 years. So the EVs are going to become a more and more attractive option. If you look at regulations, they're favoring zero-emission vehicles. So when we say zero-emission vehicles, it's electric vehicles and typically also hydrogen vehicles. We believe that hydrogen vehicles won't happen, certainly not in the light vehicle space. But bottom line is all this regulation and all the, and we haven't talked about what China's doing. So China's doing a lot of stuff to promote electric vehicles. It's driving volume and it's driving down battery prices, and that's driving down the price of vehicles, right? So it's just, we're seeing a snowballing effect. We're not sure exactly how big the snowball gets, how fast, but we know that in 10 years, it's very big, okay? And like I said, hydrogen, really the reason hydrogen is not, we don't see it having a role here is because there's just no way to make it economical, okay? And again, we could talk about that after if you wish. So automakers are jumping over the chasm, right? They're finally investing tens of billions of dollars in EVs, and finally bringing lots of product to market and actually publishing ads that promote EVs. So we're seeing a significant movement in that direction. The other thing is that the U.S. and Canadian government regulations, one of the questions that I was asked to answer here is what is the impact of those regulations? The reality is that we think that the strengthening regulations will have an impact. and it will speed adoption or change adoption by somewhere between 5 and 10 years. Reality is if North America doesn't have any strong incentives for manufacturers to send EVs here or sell EVs here, they're going to be sent elsewhere where other governments are forcing manufacturers to sell EVs. So it's a question of supply. The regulation will help us with supply, and if there is a strong regulation in Canada, we'll adopt faster. But if there isn't, we'll adopt anyways. It'll just take longer. Okay, geopolitics is important here. The reason it's important is because the U.S. auto industry is very big, and it would be a problem geopolitically for the U.S. to lose its lead or get even further behind, if you will, what the other countries of the world are doing, right? One last conclusion, and I haven't talked really about charging, but where governments could really have an impact is by helping deploy more charging infrastructure. We believe that about 60% or so of the population in North America has easy access to charging, so they live in single-family homes where they could easily plug in their vehicles. But there's another 40% that has difficulty accessing charging, and getting those people to adopt EVs will require some movement on the part of governments to make that easier in a variety of ways. So in closing, it's easy to overestimate what will happen over the next 2 years, and I've been hoping to see a large ramp up in market share over for a while now. But essentially, the ducks are lined up, and the context, economic, regulatory context, and climate change is pushing everybody in the same direction. So we expect to see major changes over the next 10 years. So Art, that's it for now.
Peter.
Yes, indeed. Oh, thank you so much, Raymond. A wonderful presentation. Oops, I'm sorry. I've got two things going here. Anyhow, I'm muted. I don't know why I'm.
Just go ahead, and I'll shut you down.
Okay. There we go. No, I've got too many things going here. Just a second. Sorry about that. Yeah.
Okay, while we're waiting, go ahead. Our first question is from
I have a question I'd like to start with, if I may. And you mentioned hydrogen. I wanted to understand the impact of hydrogen and why you don't think it will have an effect. But the other thing is the batteries. The problem of new batteries, I'm reading a lot about the whole host of new batteries that are being invented, solid state, etc., and some with very rapid charging rates, etc. What impact will that have on your projections?
So let's take the hydrogen question first. So the reason basically that we believe that hydrogen won't have a role, particularly in the lighter vehicle categories, is that it's a question of physics. If you want to be using clean hydrogen to power electric vehicles, you have to be using hydrolysis. Okay, if you're using some other mechanism to produce hydrogen, which typically right now about 96% or so of hydrogen is produced using steam reformation of methane, which actually emits CO2. Okay, so it doesn't get rid of the greenhouse gases. It does reduce them a bit for a variety of reasons, but it doesn't by any means get rid of them. Excuse me, you could do carbon capture and capture the carbon that way, but typically carbon capture these days is used to increase production of oil. right? Which we need to get away from. But so let's say you're using green hydrogen, then you're doing hydrolysis, right, to produce that hydrogen. Well, the theoretical maximum efficiency that you could get by doing the hydrolysis and then using the fuel cell to recombine oxygen and hydrogen into water to produce electricity, the theoretical maximum you could get is around 37% efficiency. Okay, that doesn't take into consideration the cost of storing, because if you're storing hydrogen, you have to either refrigerate it or you have to compress it. Doesn't take into consideration other things with hydrogen. And without getting into all the intricacies there, if you take that same electricity and pump it into a battery in an electric car, you're going to get 3 times the distance with the same amount of electricity. So the problem that does from a practical point of view is that it makes hydrogen always more expensive than using electricity. Okay, so the only real advantage that hydrogen has in terms of fueling light vehicles is the time it takes to fuel a vehicle. And your second question sort of spoke to that to some degree. So what we're seeing vehicles that are faster and faster to charge. And we expect that at some point, charging times will drop to 10 minutes or less, which is comparable to what you get with a hydrogen vehicle. So there won't be that advantage. Now, in terms of what will it do to adoption rates? So we expect the forecast we've done and the forecast that Bloomberg have done are based on the existing technology, lithium ion as it exists today, and the incremental improvements year after year with that technology. If other, and I've seen some outlandish claims out there that frankly, some of those claims are fraudulent. But we're going to see improvements. We're going to see different chemistries eventually make it to market, and they will cause cost to decrease even more, and they will cause charging speeds to get faster, right? So even so, with the current technology, we expect those adoption rates, if we get faster, cheaper batteries coming sooner, well, the adoption rate should be even higher. Okay. Now, that being said, if you look at solid state batteries, there's still some significant issues with solid state batteries, and we don't see those appearing in any kind of large numbers before another 4 or 5 years or so. So by that time, the current crop of lithium ion batteries will have continued to improve. So, you know, we're not expecting, we don't need a fundamental change in chemistries to be able to get the numbers we're looking at.
Okay. Toyota, of course, is going to hydrogen vehicles as well, but that's...
Yes.
Peggy, you have the first question, and then David.
Okay. Thank you for the presentation. And you did make a comment about the ugliness of the Nissan. I should explain that when I was looking for an electric vehicle, I had to take my double base with me to see if I could load it into the car. And I didn't have a Tesla to try this on. But the Nissan, it was easy to load into, to use for loading. And also the company deducted the rebate, which was $14,000 from their sales price. And the Kia, on the other hand, did not deduct the sales price. You had to apply for it yourself. I mean, the rebate. So my question is about secondhand issues. Like, you can buy a secondhand electric vehicle. Why can you not buy a secondhand battery that might be bigger than the one that you have in your current electric vehicle, such as the 2016 Leaf has a battery that has a range of up to about 200 kilometers, whereas the 218 has a range up to about close to 300. And the latest Leaf, I believe, has a range up close to 400.
Yes.
So if I were to buy a new battery for my 218 Leaf, I would increase my range to about 400.
Mhm.
And my friend who bought my 216 Leaf would take my battery and replace it in his car. And he would then gain closer to get up to about 300. So I just wondered if maybe a member of EVCO might be able to do such an exchange, or
What-
any other company in town.
Yeah, sorry, Peter, you want to say something?
No, that's all. Thank you.
Okay, so this is a fairly common question we get in terms of retrofitting and all that. The problem really is that every single situation you're looking at will be specific. So if you look at taking the battery from the 2018 and putting it in the 2016, the 2016 is the old style Leaf, right? The one that I called ugly, and the 2018 is the one that looks nice, right?
Well, I thought my 2016 was quite pretty. It had a solar panel.
Yeah, so some people thought it looked good, but it was unique, right? But it was very different from the 2018. The 2018 is a newer model, right? So the 2018 battery probably doesn't fit in the 2016. Okay, because it's the batteries, the way they're designed right now is they're designed specifically for the model they will fit into. Okay, now this gets complicated in a number of different ways. So it means that it's not necessarily possible to take one battery from one vehicle, put it into another. There's other things that are happening with batteries. Some manufacturers use 400 volt batteries, others use 800 volt batteries, and a bunch of things. There's other manufacturers like Tesla in particular, and others have talked about doing this, but Tesla is probably the furthest along the path there, is they're thinking of putting their batteries as a structural component of the vehicle. And I won't go into the details, but the bottom line is it becomes almost impossible to remove the battery for a quick swap in that circumstance, right? So it's a bit like if you go to Canadian Tire and you're looking for, you're looking for wipers for your car. Well, you have to buy the wipers that are the right size, the right length, the right this, the whatever, right? And between different models, even with the same brand, those things don't necessarily fit together. So it's really an individual effort to figure this out, right? There's some people who are trying to do something that would be commercial scale, but the problem is there's just too much variability. Now, there was a question earlier or talk earlier about before we started actually about swapping batteries. There's a few companies that have tried that, but again, swapping batteries has the same issue. The ones that we're doing it with the same model to same model. Which is technically relatively straightforward, but if the battery becomes part of the structure of the vehicle, then it becomes impossible to remove it, within a matter of minutes, because it would be part of the structure of the vehicle. What I would like to see personally is I would like to see heavy-duty vehicles, so particularly 18-wheelers, adopt a standardized system of batteries that could be easily swapped to make that part of the market easier to convert to electric vehicles. But for smaller vehicles, there haven't been many players doing it, and I don't see that happening as much as it might be desirable, right?
Too much variety. David,
Yeah.
then Phil.
Could I just say one thing? So there must be other ways of recycling batteries then.
Oh, yes. So recycling batteries is a whole different topic. Now, again, that depends on the battery that's there, right? And one of the issues right now with recycling car batteries is the volume is still not there. The volumes are still not very big because batteries are lasting a lot longer than we were expecting them to originally. But there are a number of initiatives that are popping up all over the place to do recycling of batteries. So that will be a big business as soon as there are enough batteries to recycle.
Thank you.
Thank you. David, and then Phil.
Right, so it directly relates to what you were just discussing. It was, in fact, my question from just before our session recording began. I remember seeing a video. Wasn't sure at the time whether it was Renault or Citroën. I think because I did a little bit of research in the interim and found a link that is now in the chat. I think it was probably Renault. They had an automated system where you would drive into a little garage, a set of robots would take your battery off the bottom of the car and install a new one. You would pay for it with your charge card and drive out in less time than it takes to refill your car with petrol or diesel fuel. And apparently there are, in fact, firms, including Renault, that are considering doing this right now. I think that if the industry, either voluntarily or by force, were told you must have a port to allow the fueling of your vehicle, and that port must be of a certain size, which is exactly what they have done with my current car. Everybody has the exact same port. We could do this with batteries. We could have the exact same batteries. Maybe they could be of slightly different sizes or larger or smaller, different voltages, as you say, but we don't have to have a particular battery for one make of car. And I just think that we ought to have a network of battery exchange stations rather than battery charging stations. It would be far better in so many ways. And apparently the Chinese are actually now moving toward this.
Well, they're in China, there's over 200 different companies that are producing EVs. So it's a bit of a wild west there. And yes, there are some that are doing battery swaps. Now, the fundamental problem we're trying to solve here is how fast can you fuel up your vehicle, right? That's really what we're trying to do.
But also, where can you get the fuel? And so
yes.
if every single Petro-Canada, Shell, and any other station you want to mention had one of these battery swapping stations, you would never worry.
Yes, so that would work, okay? So technically that would work. Now, if we go back to what is the problem we're trying to solve, what we're trying to solve is we want to be able to stop for a short period of time to be able to get whatever electricity we need to keep on going on our way, right? So one way is to, like you say, is to swap the battery, right? And there have been people that tried it. Tesla actually demonstrated that a few years back, but they decided not to go with it, and their reasons had to do with business models, because then you're changing the battery, and maybe the person is going to swap the battery just because they want a newer battery, and they leave you with the old battery. And anyways, so they decided we're not doing it. It's not it's not going to work. So the other way to solve that problem is to allow the batteries, or find a way to get the batteries to charge faster, right? And I think that's what's going to end up being the outcome, because that's actually easier to solve, in the sense that you could let the manufacturers do what the heck they want with batteries, and put them where they want, how they want, format they want, and they could have a competitive advantage based on the batteries that they do provide, right? Whereas if you swap those at a gas station, well, everybody's got the same batteries, so you lose an advantage. So to me, the key is, how can we get these cars to charge faster? And if I speak about my Model Y, so I've got a Model S and a Model Y. The Model Y will, if I'm doing a long trip, I'm waiting 10 to 20 minutes to charge. When I'm charging, that's it. That's already getting very close to refueling a vehicle, especially because you don't have to stay at the vehicle when you're recharging, right? When you're refueling, you have to stay there for the whatever 5 minutes it takes. So and those speeds are increasing. So I would suspect that within 10 years we're going to have charging times that are in the 5 to 10 minute range, and the problem disappears that way, right?
Okay, thank you. Phil, and then Rick.
Yeah, hi. Another battery question or observation. We got two electric vehicles, one in the 2017 edition, one in the 2018 edition. I'm not somebody that drives a lot of distance, so therefore the car itself is going to keep its structural capacity for a long time. The battery exchange issue is something that concerns me because I feel that I may be penalized for having a battery that most people don't want to buy in a used vehicle because it would be seen as being less than the current standard. So it goes back to sort of the business of selling your used EV. Do you know of any strategy of when it's best to sell your used EV? Is there any talk of incentives for people to buy used EVs through reputable dealers for sure? But when I started talking to the dealer of my full EV, he said, well, we're not really interested in taking in a used EV. There isn't a market for it.
So sorry, I have to laugh there because if you look at the stats, actually, used EVs sell faster than used gas or diesel vehicles. So there is a very, very strong market for it. Now, if you live in Ontario, in particular, and you sell your vehicle to someone in Quebec, Quebec has a $4,000 or up to $4,000 incentive on used vehicles. So if your vehicle never was subject to the new vehicle incentive in Quebec, it's eligible for the use incentive. So someone would save $4,000 by buying your car, right? Instead of buying a car that came from Quebec. Okay. So bottom line is there are incentives. Ontario is really bad for that now. Plug and Drive had an incentive at one point that would give you up to $2,000 for buying a used EV. I believe they've run out of money for that. I'm not sure at this point, and they're looking to get more. Obviously, this was money provided by a private donor. But there are incentives. Used EVs they keep their value better than gas cars. If you look at prices of used Teslas at this point, a lot of used Teslas are more expensive than new Teslas, which is totally crazy. But anyways, you know, what can I say? When's the best time? You know, in your case, you won't be penalized for. You know, people don't really look at the technology of the battery that much. What they will look at though is the amount of mileage on the vehicle. Because the more mileage you put on the vehicle, the more cycling charges you would have done, and the more chance there is that the battery would have degraded. So I expect if you're treating your battery well, and this is a longer conversation, you know, the value of your used EV will be high for the foreseeable future. I mean, you should be able to sell that at a really good price.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So we move to Rick and then Peter.
Raymond, this was a wonderful talk and excellent discussion following. I think that the talk should be made available for every potential EV purchaser. That means just about every Canadian adult. My question has to do with vehicle to grid capability. And I listened very carefully when you enumerated the advantages of the EV, and obviously the economic advantage was the overriding one. However, vehicle to grid, to me, is an advantage that may be just enough to tip me over the edge to buy an EV sooner rather than later. It's an advantage to me as a consumer, because if I can put electricity from my car into my house, it gives me some backup power in the event that the grid fails in, you know, increasing climate difficulties that we're expecting, and I'll be able to have heat during the winter. It is also of advantage to the grid, because as we've seen with California, the plugged-in vehicle becomes part of the grid. So I was interested, first of all, why you didn't mention that as one of the advantages. And secondly, does that mean that it's not recognized as an advantage by governments and by hydro let's say, electricity providers, grid providers?
Wow, that's quite a complex topic. So I didn't mention vehicle to grid for a number of reasons, but right now it turns out that most vehicles that are available on the market today do not support vehicle to grid. Okay. So there are some that do, the Nissan Leaf in particular, and you've probably, if you've seen the announcements for the Ford F-150 Lightning, that's one of the things that they tout as being a big advantage, because what they're saying is the battery will be big enough to power your house for 3 days if there's a power failure. So vehicle to grid is a very broad topic and very interesting topic. Now, if you look at Ontario, the big problem with vehicle to grid is the regulatory framework for the utilities and how that is all set up. So there are some other jurisdictions in the world, in Europe in particular, in some place in the US, where they're running some projects to do vehicle to grid and to use a vehicle to grid really for a number of different reasons. So one of the things you want to be able to do with an electric vehicle is you want to charge the vehicle when there's the most electricity available on the grid, which generally means at night, right? For those who don't know, in Ontario, we waste something like 5% of our capacity at night by just letting it flow over dams because we don't have anything to do with the electricity that we would produce. So there's essentially free electricity available to charge some of the vehicles, right? And the other corresponding problem to that is peak demand. So in Ontario, our most expensive electricity comes from the gas plants that are there just for peak demand. And they also pollute, right? They generate GHGs. So what some people are doing is they want to use vehicle to grid to shave the peak. So you plug your vehicle when you get home. It would pull power from your vehicle for the early part of the evening when there is a peak, and then it would replenish the vehicle later at night, okay, when there's more plentiful power. So there's a lot of people working on that kind of thing, and that's I think a really exciting thing that's happening in the EV world, and it's got a great future. Now, if you look at, I saw a number that said that if and I can't remember the details, I think it's if 10% of the vehicles in Germany were electric and hooked up to vehicle to grid, the capacity that you would have in terms of how much you could generate from all those vehicles would equal the full capacity of the German electrical system. So when you're looking at large volumes of vehicles, it becomes easier and easier to really, really see how you could get creative in how you deal with the electrical system, right? So yeah, vehicle to grid is something that's very, very interesting. But again, this is a very broad topic that we could talk about for a long time.
Okay, thank you. And then to Peter, and next is John Meyer.
Hi, I really had two quick questions in there. One was where all the electricity was going to come from, and the other was a question of road taxes, because gasoline and diesel, they may not provide all of it, but they provide a good chunk of road maintenance, repair, construction. Saskatchewan implemented a tax on electric vehicles for that purpose and got met with great ire and indignation from those who don't believe that electric vehicles should carry costs.
Yeah. So what was the first question again? Sorry.
Where's the electricity coming from?
Oh, yeah. Okay. So where's the electricity come from? So there have been lots of studies done on this issue. And so I did say earlier that in Ontario in particular, we waste water going over dams at night because we can't do anything with the electricity that would be produced. We tend to have a very large oversupply of electricity at night in Ontario. So a lot of the electricity that would be used for vehicle charging would be used at night and would be capacity that's already there. Okay, so so the cost actually of the electricity would be very low, and it should result in a lowering of the average cost of electricity overall. Okay, so there's plenty. So what's the numbers that I've seen for Ontario is that if 30% of our fleet was electrified today, we would have enough capacity to deal with that as it is now, right? That would be largely because we are charging it at times where there is overcapacity anyways. So that, you know, we do have the capacity. Beyond that, then that's a bit of a longer discussion. What I believe is happening is if you look at the reduction in prices of batteries, we're also seeing a similar reduction in prices of solar and wind. So any extra capacity using solar and wind would actually cost less than the current rates that we're paying in Ontario. So so there's, you know, that would be where the extra electricity would come from. So to electrify the full fleet, we're talking about maybe a 30% increase in the capacity of the grid. And you know, even if we're selling 100% new cars in 2035, it's going to take another 10 or 15 years before all the gas cars go away. So this increase in capacity would happen over a long period of time, and we're talking only a few percent a year. So it's not, you know, we wouldn't by any means need a massive increase in electricity supply overnight to be able to do this.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And
I just thought maybe I might just want to step in here for a second and say that we also have this ongoing growth of microgrids and homes that are producing their own electricity. I can say that I have 2 EVs and I've never had to draw any power at all from the grid. So as microgrids grow in size, and I know that Musk is building an entire town of, I don't know, is it 10,000 homes is in the plan in Dallas, and he's putting solar on the roof of all those homes and charge points and Powerwall batteries such that they can be quite independent of the main grid, at least most of the time. But that is also reducing the load on the grid.
Yes, and actually, when it comes to solar, in Ontario today, this was not always the case, but this is the case and will become more the case in the future. The peak usage is in warm, sunny afternoons like today. And that happens to be when solar produces the most. So so there's a really good match between solar and the peaks in Ontario. So it makes a lot of sense to deploy more solar for that, for sure.
thank you, John, and then Jean.
Yeah, I'd like to emphasize Art's point. In my house, it's I built it, it's all electric. And if I do eventually get my 10 kilowatt array up on the roof, I will be able to supply all of the energy that the house needs and drive an EV 30 to 40,000 kilometers a year. So that, and the calculations I did a couple of years ago showed that the increase in electricity demand for a 100% electrified ground fleet would be 8 to 13%. We'd need 8 to 13% more generation. So I just don't see it as an issue going forward. My question is scarcity, and as Bill Reeves would say, the size of the human enterprise right now. EVs that we're making, they're the best in their categories. The Taycan is the Porsche Taycan Turbo S is the best sports car anyone has driven, according to the reviews I've read. The Mercedes EQS is basically a state-of-the-art luxury sedan, and the Tesla Model 3 owns the sports sedan market. And so they're established that they're the best in these categories. But do we need to keep, and the trucks that are coming out, the Hummer, I think is going to have it's going to be 9,000 pounds, and it's going to have a 200 kilowatt battery. So we're electrifying what we're doing. And we don't need to do that. We need to electrify, and we need to downsize what we're doing. A Hummer, the battery that goes into a Hummer could supply, could be used to build 10 urban vehicles with 20 kilowatt batteries. My point is we need to deal with the scarcity and downsize, and we need to have EVs that are smaller batteries and are smaller vehicles, and we need a very well built out comprehensive rapid charging network. How would you address that proposal?
Well, so first of all, I 110% agree with you, right? My experience, and I've been doing EV advocacy for about 8 years now. My experience is I find, unfortunately, very much unfortunately, very few people who are willing to either pay more or sacrifice anything about their lifestyle to be greener. Okay, so the audience here is very different, I'm sure, given who you are and all that, right? But the general population, they don't want any disadvantage out of a new solution. They want something that'll be better, faster, cheaper, right? So the issue becomes, if people are buying pickup trucks, we could try to convince them to bike or ride to work instead. But that's only going to convince a small portion of the population, and that's good. There's no doubt about that. It's good for the environment. It's good for the health of the person doing it too. So there's massive reasons why we want to do that. The problem I'm seeing, from my perspective, and the way that I've that I try to deal with the situation, is that there's a climate crisis. We need to reduce greenhouse gases yesterday, right? So what I'm trying to do is getting as many people to substitute something that's spewing out 3 to 6 tons of greenhouse gases a year with something else that will spew out a lot less, right? So so yes, I'd like to convince people that they should be buying smaller vehicles and all that, but it's very hard to change people's habits. It's easier to substitute a product that's cheaper, better, simpler, and all that, right? So that's why I'm focusing on trying to replace gas cars with electric cars. I certainly don't want to convince people who are biking and walking or taking transit to work to buy an electric car instead. That would be misguided, right? So I understand your point, but I guess my pragmatic view is that it's very hard to change humans, and I'm trying to go for how do we reduce that carbon footprint in the easiest way possible, right? And that's where we are, right? So I do realize that there are other effects. I mean, EVs are not they do have an environmental footprint, obviously, and we'd like to get rid of that, right? And there are efforts to do that. That's a whole other discussion. But yeah, I'm more focused on let's reduce greenhouse gases ASAP, and hopefully we could save the planet and work on the other issues as a follow-on activity as soon as possible, right?
Yeah, I agree. EVs are the biggest carbon bang for the buck.
Yeah.
Right. So anyway, thanks very much.
Thank you. And Jean, and then Chloe.
Thank you, Raymond. That was an absolutely fabulous presentation.
Thank
And what I had said in the line on the chat was that I wanted to talk about home charging stations. And the question I've got is sort of twofold. When we were one of the times we were looking at possibly buying a plug-in hybrid or an EV, there were so many different ends. I presume that these are parts of the charging stations that were available. Tesla has one, somebody else has another model. How on earth have they actually set up standards so that there's not this plethora of charging stations? Because it can be a problem in that you'd have to get a rapid charging in your home, you'd have to put that kind of charging station in. And that can be a problem when you're a renter. The other aspect of mine is renting. Okay.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. So renting is definitely an issue in terms of being able to, plug things in and all that. Now, that being said, I know some people have been driving electric for 30 or 40 years, and yes, there have been weird, odd electric vehicles available for that long. So, so some of the people in our have been driving electric vehicles for that long, and one of them in particular has always used a 120 volt plug, never anything else, and he has 2 EVs right now, and that's plenty for what he needs. Right now, you're talking a techno geek who's gonna, realizes the limitations and all that, right? If you're charging from home and you're not so knowledgeable about all the parameters and all that, what you would typically do is you would put a 240 volt charger. Okay. The good news there is that really there's one standard that applies to every single vehicle sold in North America. And it's called the J1772 plug, and it's used for 220 volt charging in all of North America. Tesla has a different adapter. However, when you buy a Tesla vehicle, they are compelled by law actually to provide you an adapter that works with the J1772. Okay, so if you buy a charger for home and it's a non-Tesla charger, but although Tesla has J1772 chargers, but you buy an EV duty charger or you buy a flow charger or something, it will work with every EV that's available in Canada. So that's for level 2 charging. Level 3 charging is a bit of a different story. So what we refer to as DC fast charging is a different story, but that's not what you would put at home. Those are units that would cost you $50,000 to $100,000 to install at home, and you would have to have 400 or 800 volts of power to power them, right? So you would not do that at home. When you're on the road, though, you need to use those, and the situation there is simpler than most people think. Tesla have their own chargers, and that's the different story. But everybody else uses there's 2 different adapters that exist, and all the charging locations I know have those 2 adapters available. Okay, and it looks like North America is going to do like Europe and converge on one of those 2 adapters as being the standard even for Teslas, okay? Because in Europe, Teslas use the same standard as everybody else, and it's a CCS combo that they have over there, similar to the CCS combo we have here in North America, right? So I expect that's going to converge, and we're sort of pushing for that to happen sooner rather than later. But the situation may look very complicated, but it's actually relatively straightforward already. Okay?
That's really, that makes me feel better, because that was a bit confusing when we were first looking. But that doesn't stop the problem that one of the times we've actually lived in a condo that didn't, in the underground parking, there was 0 electricity available. So if you are living in a situation where you're either in communal living or renting or whatever, and there's nothing available to charge it, what do you do?
Well, so that's I could give you a very long answer to that one, but I'll try to make it short. Now, there are some condo regulations that were put in place by the previous provincial government that give you the right to get charging in a condo, there's stuff on the internet on that, but essentially a condo board has to accept a reasonable request for charging. Okay, so if you're renting, it's a bit different, right? But again, if you're in a situation like that, what may be your best bet is to start with 120 volt charging and see if that's enough for your needs or not. And surprisingly, it's enough for just about everybody in the country at this point, okay? Because the average commute is about 30 kilometers a day, right? Which is not much at all. So, but you know, the other thing is there are some organizations that that provide rentals that are deploying chargers. So you could always ask your landlord to help you with that, right? Not everybody's open to it as much as others, but I know that Homestead in particular, which is a fairly large landlord here in Ottawa, they've got some locations where they do have chargers available for the people who live in their buildings.
So in essence, it's going to require some regulation as well as
Yes.
demand.
Well,
Chloe,
yeah.
I'm afraid we have to move to
Okay,
Chloe.
all right,
And
thank
then
you.
the last question to Bill Tyson, the last question for the recorded session for Bill. Chloe.
Okay, thanks. Great talk, and Raymond, and I'm asking about the supplies of lithium. I've heard several times that lithium is not everywhere and it's not easy to dig it up.
Okay, so one thing that you need to understand is that when you're looking at such a large technological change, there are winners and there are losers, right? So in this case, the oil industry is looking to lose a lot of market because of the replacement of fossil fuel powered vehicles with electricity, right? So there's actually a documented effort by the oil industry to discredit electric vehicles. And one of the things they bring up often is lithium and a bunch of things about lithium. The reality is lithium is not that rare on the planet. And if just for a measure of that, if you go back to Tesla did something called a battery day last year, about a year ago, I guess, where they talked about a bunch of things and their plans and all that. And Elon Musk actually was almost begging mining companies to provide him one substance he's looking for. It's not lithium. He's looking for more nickel. Okay, so the production of lithium is not seen to be an issue at this point. It's more the production specifically of nickel at this point because of the chemistries that are involved. No, lithium is not such a big problem. Lithium production does involve some nasty chemicals with some processes that are being used for lithium. But that's not very different from refining petroleum and what that requires, right? And another very common question I get is about cobalt and the mines of children, child labor in the Congo in cobalt mines. Well, what the oil industry doesn't tell you is at this point in time, and this is changing as battery production includes or improves or increases. What's happening is sorry, I just got distracted by something here. So as of last year or so, is the numbers that I've seen, the oil industry was using as much cobalt for the refining of petroleum product as what is being used for electric vehicle batteries. But you never hear about the fact that removing sulfur from petroleum requires cobalt, which is coming from these same mines. Okay, so so you have to sort of dig in a bit further as when you hear those things. Yes, there are challenges. There's no doubt. Like I said earlier, EVs are not environmentally pristine, but there is some disinformation out there trying to convince people that EVs are not a good solution.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Okay, and the last question to Bill.
Yeah, hello, can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Good. Excellent talk, Raymond. Thank you very much. I just have a trivial question. I'll be brief. What do you do when you run out of charge on the road?
Well, I guess it's not very different from if you run out of gas, right? You know what typically happens if this truly happens, what will typically happen is you tow the vehicle to a charger somewhere. Okay. That being said, and again, this could be a very long answer, but the vehicles are very good at determining, at telling you how much range is left. So you really have to try to run out of electricity to get into that situation. Okay, so that's I guess that's the answer.
You don't have to run a cable then from the nearest station.
Well, so you say that the thing to realize too is that if you're somewhere and you run out of fuel, if you run out of gas, you have to find a gas station somewhere somehow to get the gas. If you run out of electricity, you could plug it into the nearest 120 volt outlet, right? Now it won't be fast to charge, right? But electricity is much more available than gas, right? So if you're going to grandma's house in Northern Ontario and you're concerned about charging, well, if you're going to grandma's house, you're probably going to stay there overnight or whatever, if it's far, right? You could charge with 120 volt and you'll probably have enough to make it back to the nearest fast charger, right? So electricity is available essentially everywhere except off grid, except Art's Place. But actually, Art's Place is off grid, but it has electricity. So,
Points. Thank you.
Okay.
Great. I'd like to call on Jean to thank Raymond for this wonderful talk. Jean?
Yes, just let me get my video going again. Thank you. Raymond, I just want to say on behalf of KCOR, I'd like to thank you so much for an absolutely comprehensive talk and a really great question and answer period. Your knowledge is extensive and very authoritative, and I think that is absolutely fantastic. And I hope that all of us will remember this talk so that when we are discussing EV vehicles with our friends and our compatriots, we'll think to use this talk to promote this for people. So again, I just want to thank you very, very much. I think this was a wonderful presentation.
Well, thanks very much for having me. I really enjoyed it.
Excellent. I would also like to point out to those people here who are not part of KCOR that we would love you to go and take a look at our website at canadiancore.com. And if you're interested in joining our society, all the information there is available for you to look at potential membership and or donating to us. And also for those of us who would like to subscribe to our YouTube channel, that would be wonderful. Thank you very much.